And hello, everybody. We're here for another segment of our presidential tiering, and I think we're going to get up to Lincoln, and we might spend one one on Lincoln. Maybe not. We'll probably spend a little more time on Lincoln, so we'll probably do the next four. And we have Zachary Taylor up first. And Taylor is one of these presidents that he doesn't have much of a record. He's not rated very high by most presidential historians, but I might have a bias about him that I'm going to try to guard against. He was one of the first presidents I learned about. Um, when I was a kid, they used to have these biographies of presidents, and I don't know how accurate they were. They probably weren't that accurate, but I read them, a ton of them. And I think they hit the big stroke pictures well, and then they might have just gone with lore and myth. I don't know, but it was talking mostly about Zachary Taylor as a kid and then as a young man, and then it went on to his role in the Mexican War, which was he was a very good commander in the Mexican War, and then his short term as president of the United States. And what I remember from this is Zachary Taylor never surrenders. This is like when I was like 9 years old. I read this book. It wasn't a comic book; it was a real book, but it wasn't very big, and it was big print. Typical for like a you know. I was a good reader, so late elementary, middle school type era rating. So he's short term. He came in with no political experience. He just was basically a soldier, and he had, done well in the war. He actually defeats Winfield Scott, who had been his commander too. Not much up. He does do some things that are probably interesting from his background, as he's a Southerner, but he also recognizes, to his credit, that slavery is a problem, and he's very instrumental in California. Not coming in as a free state, not just because of its location, but he goes, California has a right to statehood, not going through the territorial process, and this would ensure that it would come in as a free state, which was pretty good. He actually opposed the process of the Compromise of 1850, which again was just another compromise. It wasn't it was kicking the can down the road, and because the sides just could not agree what they were going to do with all this territory, mostly from the Mexican War, how's it going to work out? That's a big part of it, but it also does introduce some other aspects, which we'll get into later. But he was not really keen on it. That's all he did. He was there for a year. So not much of a record to go by. So I guess, teacher's motto, when in doubt, and the kid kind of is absent a little bit, but they know their stuff a little bit. We're going to give him a C. He didn't do a lot of harm. I think you could say he didn't really make things any worse. And I think California, he wasn't there when California did enter as, he was involved in the process, being behind the scenes of California coming in as a free state, which probably was obviously a good thing. If that had been a slave state, or if they had gone through what Kansas is going to go through later, it would have been a mess. Okay. Next up, now a lot of people think this guy looks like Alec Baldwin. I don't really know. This is Fillmore, and Fillmore is he's kind of wig-like in his doings, that he is a little more federalist. He is an infrastructure guy, and he's working on roads and canals and all that stuff, railroads. This is going to possibly play into the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, because railroads were a big contention, and then Stephen Douglas has his not so good plan later on with the railroads, at least the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He completes the Compromise of 1850, and the one thing that is in there is the Fugitive Slave Act, and this is not this really angers the North, and it does it conciliates the South a little bit, and the whole idea that these slaves, once it kind of reached the northern states, the understanding, the practice, basically speaking, was that it was kind of like when you were a kid and played freeze tag, and you're at, you had the safe zone. You were in that safe zone. You couldn't be tagged. And this eliminates this. This sets federal agents having the authority to bring, capture, retain, and then bring back fugitive slaves. He's a one-term president. He is not terrible. I'm going to, the thing is, what was going to happen? I mean, again, these compromises they're not really good. He's just, I think the infrastructure is good, but I think that he just didn't do enough, maybe to contend the Fugitive Slave Act, but could it have been stopped? Could it have been done? The president was almost, all these presidents are like in a train that is getting off the rails, and I don't know constitutionally what they could have done to stop it. You're looking at, it's not just the presidents are weak, it's that the compromises are running out, and both sides are getting fed up with the compromises. And again, it's becoming more and more and more a zero-sum argument for both sides. So with Fillmore, we're going to stick him in the C group. He's not awful, but he's certainly not that great. And now we have a moment, and we're just going to give right here, we have our first F of a president. And this is F for Franklin Pierce. Now, interesting tidbit, he is fourth cousin, I believe, of, separated by generations, of Barbara Bush, who was George H.W. Bush's wife. So that's an interesting little tidbit. He has an incident that we're giving him an F, but it's the kind of thing, like, I've been educated for many years. You give an F, and you kind of figure, well, how can you give the kid a pass? Not that we're going to pass him, but what are the underlying circumstances that are this F? He has a really bad situation happen. He wins the presidency, and shortly after he arrives in Washington, his 10-year-old kid is decapitated by a train in front of him. So he sees this, and his wife kind of she goes off on him, and she never forgives him for that, kind of blaming him, which is, understandable. It's not correct, but it's understandable. He becomes an alcoholic. So this guy is, in a morose depression, and he's pretty much drunk for large segments of his thing. And it's understandable. I mean, that would just, how do you undo seeing something like that? And losing a child is just, I can't even imagine that. And in that way, but he's still a bad president. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is just one of the worst parts of the whole train wreck that's coming. Now, this is something that's interesting, though. The whole idea Douglas wanted to have was to use popular sovereignty and let the people vote, and they'll decide whether, they'll come in as a free state or a slave state. And so what you have happening is you have ruffians, or not ruffians, but you have people who are very partisan slave people going back and forth from Kansas and Missouri and things like that. And there are a lot of murders going on, a lot of bushwhacking going on. And this kind of, when you have a situation, this is for people who would validate the construct of reigning in democracy in certain times when the passions are so hot. Is popular sovereignty the way to go? And I think that's a valid question to ask. One of my favorite politicians is Al Smith, who was governor of New York and ran for president in the 1920s. And he had a kind of a maxim: the cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy. But did it really pan out in the Kansas-Nebraska Act? I would say probably didn't. I think in this case, you needed to have firmer guidelines. But the seeds that had been sown by slavery, and it's there. It's just ruining everything. And it's like when you have an argument with someone and you have a real underlying argument that's not resolvable, and you compromise and you've tried to have it work out, and it's just not working out. And that whole effect, as I mentioned in an earlier video, that it's just absolutely saturating and flavoring everything with that garbage taste, and it's ruining the country. So that's Franklin Pierce in a nutshell. A very tragic story. And the tragedy that's becoming this nation is kind of hastened by our next president, who I think you could say is probably the worst president in the United States history, James Buchanan. Buchanan really never wanted the job, but he ends up in the job. Um, he he can't slow down the path to the Civil War, and really don't think he tried very much. He did try to have a decent cabinet, was balanced, which is usually a good idea, get different ideas, but at this point there just was a lot of silence or angered words. Dred Scott gets employed and put into action during his presidency, which is again another one. And the thing that's interesting, if you look at some of his speeches, you might hear some impassioned cry like Lincoln, talking about the blood, the memories of the blood from patriots past, calling to us, and those things, looking back in our history. Um, he doesn't do that. And then you have the Panic of 57, which again, you have all these panics with these banks. And basically it starts it's caused by um, issues with trade deficits and a recession going on, unemployment, and a bank is unable to pay out its notes, and it starts a run. And this was actually affected also Great Britain's economy quite a bit. One of the reasons why it spread so fast is because the telegraph has come about, and all over now the wires, it's going, this bank has failed, and there's a run in this bank, and then there gets to be a run in all the banks. And so this is making it worse. You have this all during Buchanan's presidency, and then you start having again, the partisan groups really get worse, especially with John Brown, marauding throughout, all over the place, and eventually, heading up and toward Harper's Ferry, trying to lead a slave insurrection. Buchanan just does not. The but the but could anyone have gotten the train under control? I think is a fair question to ask. We tend to look at these things, but he's exceptionally weak in this presidency. But again, I don't know if anyone could do it, and it's going to come to a head with the presidency of Lincoln. So I think what we're going to do here, this is a rather short video, but Lincoln is so important, and that we're going to stop here, and we'll come back, and then we'll do Lincoln and Johnson and Grant, who are very contrast. You have definitely an A level president, and remember, what I'm going to do is all of the A's are going to go then into this superior. I'm going to take a couple of them, and then we'll pick one for those three, and I'll put the GOAT. And I kind of know who the A's are already. I knew this kind of going in. There won't be a lot of A's. There's probably going to be maybe 4-5 A's. That's it. But I guess we have a nice dispersal, nice little bell curve here, pretty balanced between the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's our plan, is that we'll do Lincoln and Johnson and Grant. And I think you have a great president, a pretty bad president, and a surprisingly good president in the next episode. So thank you. And just remember, if you have to say the line, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe, and you can get updates when I keep doing this content and other types of things like it. I have a wide range of interests, and I think that there will be some really good conversations about world history, about United States history, about European history. It's kind of my sweet spot. And I look forward to having more people come on and stop on by. So have a great day.